Hello, friends. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the podcast where I invite other writers on, and we just have a very much inside baseball kind of conversation about writing and just the publication journey. Always a good time. I always learn something from my guests, and I'm always excited to see what they have to say. So before we get to today's guest, just a reminder that my new company, Unbound Writer, is offering in-person writing retreats in Boulder, Colorado this year in 2024, as well as coaching, one-on-one coaching, and we'll soon be offering online classes. So if you want to know more about any of those things, please head over to my website, carterwilson.com, and there's a link there that says for writers, and you can just go to read about all of those offerings from Unbound Writer. And very soon, our Unbound Writer website will be up as well, so you can just go directly to unboundwriter.com. Okay, so let's talk about our guest today. So today I had on the show Jeff Hoffmann. Jeff is a great guy. I had a really engaging conversation with him. Jeff is from the Chicago area, and he's got two books out. Is actually his new release is Like It Never Happened is the name of it. Like It Never Happened. Just came out on March 5th of this year. It was great to talk to him because, when somebody has a quasi similar background to me, their approach to writing is I'm always curious about it to see how it overlaps with mine. And when I say a similar background, I mean, Jeff definitely had aspirations for being a writer, for a longer time than I did. But we both kind of got into it, coming from a very heavy non-writing related business background. So, how we approached, analyzing and trying to understand the publishing industry is fairly similar. And he's also a pantser like me. He does not outline. So I'm always curious to talk to other, I don't know if unfortunate souls is the right term for this, but to other writers who just have no idea what the hell they're going to write. And every day is a discovery. I think it's the only way I know how to do it. And I get so much joy from doing it as well. But so Jeff, essentially, at the age of 47, left his career and pursued an MFA. And right out of the MFA program, sold the novel that he wrote for the program. So that was book number one. So it was great talking to him. I feel like there was a lot of nuggets of good advice for aspiring writers in this conversation. And we certainly had fun making up a story at the end. You're going to like this one, folks. This is my conversation with Jeff Hoffmann. It makes a huge difference. I'll tell you, like, as not only a podcast host, but one who's done some interviews here and there, like crappy equipment on the other end is so distracting.
My first book came out in, I think 2 days after I got the vaccine, right? So it was all online, and I had the regular video camera with the microphone, and I listened to things later, and I said, oh, I got to do something about that.
Totally. It makes a difference. I mean, that's, it's one thing that I coach on, and in my retreats and stuff, talking about there's more to being an author than just writing. You have to present yourself to whatever your degree of comfort is doing that. But if you are going to do it well. Learn how to speak publicly, learn how to have proper equipment, because people listen to this stuff, and it makes a difference in book sales. I mean, maybe not a huge one.
It's not all just scribbling words on paper. And
wouldn't that be nice?
That would be so easy.
It's crazy. I feel like every week I have stuff in my calendar about like specific social media things to do, depending on, if there's a book coming out or whatever. There's so many things that I spend my days on that aren't right. I mean, I only write an hour a day. That's it. And then all the other stuff is like, it takes at least a couple hours. So but you have to do it, I think.
Exactly.
So you're in the Chicago area.
I am. I'm just south of O'Hare Airport. So
okay.
You heard any noises? That's somebody landing.
Are you from there? Did you grow up there?
I grew up in St. Louis. and
Okay, so
went
always
to school.
Midwest.
Yeah, I went to school halfway between, just kept going north after college. So.
Okay. And now, growing up there, do you have memories of, you know, being maybe an outwardly creative kid or having any kind of aspirations to write or do anything within the publishing industry?
So I was a reader as a
Hmm.
kid. My dad was a high school Catholic high school teacher, so eh, creative aspirations, weren't necessarily part of what we
Part of the
thought about,
upbringing.
right? It
But
was
what was he teaching?
well, he was teaching history and
Okay,
mainly history,
sure.
and he didn't direct us towards anything, but we all went to college. My brother and sister and I all went to college, knowing that we were going to find a trade in
Right,
college, right? And
right.
but the one thing my parents did for me is when I was I think in second grade, our television broke, and they refused to get a new one until we all got on the honor roll in the same quarter. And
Oh,
to my benefit, my brother and sister and I couldn't put that together for about 2 or 3 years, and so
hmm.
I read and
Yeah,
fell in love with it. And quickly, back then, I'm 55 now, and back then it was Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, and then
right,
you start reading your dad's books, right? And
right,
and,
right.
and so um, there wasn't a a early grade young adult kind of thing, right? And so I read and read and read, and just I never pictured myself as a writer until a little bit later in my life, and
Right.
luckily I've quit a lot in my life, so that's how
Right.
that opens up space for writing is
It
what I found.
it's amazing, and a few things to unpack in there. I mean, first of all, I always think about this. We're about the same age, and I always think about. And I wasn't necessarily a big reader, but I do think about the idea that had we been growing up in the age of smartphones, would you have even read a book? Like, is that, aside from the ones that you had to, because that's what you and I are competing against now is people's attention span, not for other books, but for things like smartphones and TV.
I'm certain I wouldn't have read as much. I wouldn't have read as much if I had that big wooden console TV in the living room. Much less a TV that I could carry to my carry to my room or
Right.
control myself in my hand, right? That that that's a reality, but I think there's a certain love that once you're hooked, that kind of takes over, right? There's been times when I've been very very busy in my adult life when I wasn't able to read, and then when I came back to it, I realized how much I missed it. Um,
Yeah, and it's funny because and I really didn't get into reading until my 20s when I was living on my own in Northern California. But it's when it gets its hooks in you, it's pretty surreal. But that being said, and I read every day, not a lot, but I
uh-huh.
read every day, and I feel like it's not as often that I'm like just completely transported by a book as I used to be in my 20s. And I don't know if that's I don't think that's a commentary on the quality of writing. I think it's a commentary on just, my mindset and all the other things I'm distracted by.
Do you think it's because you've been behind the curtain? Um,
Maybe because one thing I certainly don't read as much as I used to is fiction. I'm much more
okay,
nonfiction now,
got it.
and I love nonfiction. I love because there's amazing stories in nonfiction. Um, but and I'd be curious to know how you feel about this. You sit down to read something to blurb, for example. Um, so it's right in the wheelhouse of what you write,
Right.
and it's distracting. Either it's distractingly good, and then you're like, God damn it, why didn't I write this? Or you're like, oh man, why did they do this? I would have done it this way. And I hate myself for that. But a really good story will still sweep you away. I feel like it just doesn't happen as often.
Yeah, I've set rules for myself. Nonfiction I only listen to, and
Oh,
fiction I will only read paper. Right. I
yeah.
have to smell the book. Right. And I think that tends to compartmentalize things in a way that you're always doing that that workout or the dog walk or whatever it is that fits the nonfiction vibe, right? But when I sit
That's
down in my leather
interesting.
chair and lean back with a book, it's always fiction. And I tend to I want to say I read above my pay grade, right? I try to I don't read I don't really describe myself as a genre writer, but I don't really read the type of work that I write. I can't really control what I write. I don't think, I don't really choose what I write. The stories that come are the ones that end up on the
Right.
page, right?
Right.
But I tend to read like the Pulitzer list and the Booker Prize list,
Right.
and geek out on the sentences and the character development, and all of it makes me a better writer, I think. But it doesn't distract me from the type of work that I'm doing, right?
Right. You're 100% right on that, because I'll read like a Cormac McCarthy novel and just be in awe of, and with no aspirations that I'll ever write like that.
Right, right, exactly.
But to mentally deconstruct, a sentence that on the surface makes absolutely no sense and he doesn't even have a verb in it, but yet it works. It's amazing. You said something interesting in there, like you don't describe yourself as a genre writer. I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day, and it is what it is, but it's a little frustrating, when you are categorized as, oh, you write thrillers, you write mysteries, you write suspense. Um, and they have to put that category on the back of the book because the bookstores and the libraries have to know where the hell
Right.
to shelve it. Um, but yet your impulse is to be like, well, you know, I'm not that kind of thriller writer. I write literary thrillers or whatever it is.
Right, 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 right.
And and that's a little precious too, to go that way.
It
So
is. It is.
you just kind of accept how you're categorized. But I'm like you. I'm like, I write the story that's in my head. I don't even know if anyone's going to want it or like it, but it's entertaining me, and that's primary what's important
I,
initially. How do you approach things?
I think that, I write with pace, right? That's a reality, and I think over time I've learned to write from a character's perspective with pace, and it tends to be about families um, and both. I have two books. You have what, like 40 of them, but
Oh no,
I,
9.
I have two books, and both times the acquiring editor, I said, how do you plan on pitching this, right? How do you plan on categorizing this? And both times I said, I'm not really sure,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
which there was a precious part of me that enjoyed that,
Right,
but the part of me that spent a lot of time in business in my life knows that that's a problem, right?
right.
And that businesses categorize things, and certainly the book industry categorizes things, and categorizations are useful, right? And
Totally, totally. I mean, their whole job is to sell books,
yeah, you're going to
and
sell more books
right,
if you're easy to slot into a category, and you're easy to say this is this book paired with that book and
right.
that movie, right? But
And I think you and I have that in common, is that we both come from a very heavy business background. In fact, I was in that in my industry until last year.
yeah,
Um, and well, I'm still in the industry. I'm just kind of doing my own thing in it,
yeah,
in addition to writing. But
right.
so that always made me so intensely curious about the the machinations of the publishing industry, opaque
Right.
opaque as it is. It's fascinating to me. And my publisher, who's also in Chicago, and Source Books, happens to
Okay.
be very data centric, which I've always appreciated.
Yeah, yeah,
But it is frustrating from a business mind to try to understand, because there are no formulas, right? There are
right.
no guarantees of anything, and for all your efforts and for all your publishers' efforts, it's wetting your finger and sticking in the wind and hoping for the best.
All of us writers complain about how tough it is to be a writer, right? But how terrifying would it be to be a publisher?
Terrifying.
I mean, that
Yeah.
you just never know what's going to hit. You got to buy the portfolio of books and bet on all of them, and then double down on the ones that are working, and set aside the ones that aren't, and it's a business that's got a kind of a shifting and crazy business model that I'm glad I'm on
Right.
this end of it rather than
Totally.
you know
Totally. And shifting, and with those shifting trends come, how are we going to approach the PR and marketing for this year, for this book? Because I've seen it. I've always hired my own PR team in addition to the
yeah,
publishers for all 9 books.
yeah.
And it's every year it's like, well, actually we're going to focus on
The
Instagram
most important
influencers
thing
this
is
year.
now.
Right. Right.
Forget
Right.
everything you knew 2 books ago. The
Right.
most important thing.
But it's constantly shifting,
Yep.
and by the time your book's out comes out, it'll shift again. So they don't know. And yeah, you're right. I mean, that's why my first publisher went out of business 6 months after my debut came out. um,
What business were you in before you became a writer?
so I went to hotel school, and I've been in hospitality consulting for
Okay, got it.
35 years. What now? So what did you study at school?
I studied finance, and then I
Yeah.
became an IT. I went into IT consulting, and
Okay. Okay.
um,
So, but along the way, you're doing the smart thing. You've got a responsible job, but you are, from what I can tell, you write during this time. You're not, ignoring maybe that tug on you, because I know you've been published in different reviews and periodicals. Was there always that existential dream of, hey, I'd love to do this full time?
yes, and I just to give a little background. A friend and I, right out of college, we started our own company. We worked for.
That
I
is
worked for.
courageous.
It was stupid. there's a really dark line between courage and stupidity, and we jumped right
Right. So
over.
you're talking about the early to mid 90s, coming out of a soft recession.
Yeah, so we were we graduated in 91, and by
Yeah.
92 I'd started with Anderson Consulting, and they
Uh-huh. Yep.
put me on the bus and sent me to a customer, and I looked around at all the cubes and said, I'm not going to be doing this in 5 years. And so
Right.
found a friend that was doing something, a side hustle, and it was right when Windows was kind of a fad, like jeans and rock and roll, that nobody knew whether it was going to stick around or not.
Yep. Yep.
So we found an opportunity to build a company around that. And the great thing about it was we sold it 7 years later when we were approaching 30, and it allowed me to take like 4 years off when I adopted my
Jeez.
kids, and
That's amazing.
I wrote and I traveled, and that's where I think I really got the bug, right? I wrote a book as we traveled that was just nobody would ever want to read except me, right?
But
And
you started to build that
I,
muscle.
I figured out how to put sentences together, right? And then
Right. Which is no easy feat when you have,
yeah,
because I started writing out of the blue and I had no clue. And the
yeah.
idea that you created a chapter, you're just like, that's amazing.
And then when we came back, we traveled internationally for about a year and a half, and then we came
Hmm.
back and adopted our kids, and I decided to be a stay-at-home dad for a couple years, and it just
That's amazing.
the 90 hours a week in that first decade, paid off, and the during that time I wrote a novel and a half before I got enough rejections and went back to work, right? And a couple decades forward, or decade and a half forward, I was in my mid 40s. I was 47, and um, my parents were getting older, and I was
Mhm.
watching how that trajectory worked, and I said, how many years do I got, right? And so I owned the second company too, or part of the second company, but talked to my partners, and set that aside and went back to school, and went and got my MFA at the age of 47 with a
Mhm.
bunch of kids that are in their 20s, and I'm living in the suburbs, taking the train down, right?
Right.
And just living two completely different lives, and but I was able to immerse myself in that, and for 2.5 years I was living and breathing, and spending 50, 60 hours a week on writing or doing the work for school, and
Hmm.
that was kind of my a good chunk of my 10,000 hours, right? That
Yeah.
allowed me
Yeah,
to.
totally.
And I came out of it with the first novel, right? I sold my first novel about 3 weeks after I graduated from
That's amazing.
my MFA. So
So, was your debut part of almost like your thesis for your MFA, or
it
was it?
was, it was,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
my, and because I was an old dude, right? That I knew a lot of people in my cohort. They were there to get an MFA, and I you kind of looked around and said, an MFA and a token will get you on the subway, and a book and an MFA is useful if you want to go teach, but I went there knowing that I didn't want an MFA, right? An
right,
MFA was a vehicle towards teaching me how to write a novel,
right. You
and
wanted to learn. It
I
didn't
was
matter what the
surrounding
degree
myself
was.
with people that were writing, and I knew that I would. I went to a school that had writers teaching, and
Right.
I chose the novelist as my thesis advisor, and it was all about writing the novel, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was doing while I was going to school and not going to school.
Right. Because nobody cares what your degree is almost
At all.
anywhere.
In
They
any
care
industry.
what you're capable of doing, and
Yep.
so in my case, I wrote a lot of books that never sold,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I learned how
yeah.
to find my voice, and I just gradually, it's like working out, you build that muscle over
That's
time,
right.
and
That's
you
right.
have to do it every day or you're going to start to atrophy. But it could be 10 minutes. I mean, as long as you committing yourself mentally to that. But it's a long learning curve, and it gets. I feel like the physical act of writing gets easier if I know this is what's going to happen in this scene. Just I can write fairly quickly without too much effort.
Right.
Whereas when you start off, it's like hand to hand combat. Trying to get any sentences done. But it's still tough. It's still a lot of work. And, especially like me, I don't outline. I'm like,
I'm the same way. Yeah.
how's the, but it's the only way I know how to do it.
And so that
This,
means the first draft is really fun and really easy, and then
right,
the rewriting is terrifying
right.
and time
But exciting
consuming.
because that's where it's going to come alive.
Yeah, and you know what it's about by that point, right? And,
Yeah.
and
It's usually about 80% in. I'm like, oh, this is about an addiction to saving people or whatever it is. And you realize like all these characters have this same thread going through
yep,
them,
yep.
which thankfully your subconscious was working, in the background. But yeah, don't you when you're pantsing it, like almost every day when I'm writing something, I think of something I'm like, I never would have thought of this had I tried to sit down and outline this book, because this is such a weird little nuanced turn that this just took, that I
Absolutely.
can't imagine my brain would ever have figured that out.
My first novel was a short story to start with, which I've been told
Mm.
since that that's a horrible way to start novels. And it was, it was one of those things where it was very compact and about this problem that this couple went through, and as they were adopting a child, then I tried to make a novel out of it, and I'm like, well, you can't grieve for 375 pages, right? You can for 15, but
Yeah, that can get a little heavy.
but you can't grieve for you gotta follow the arc. You gotta let the characters change, and
Right.
and and that's the big thing I learned is that you gotta ground those characters. You can't just the short story and the novel are so much different, and making that transition to okay, how does this really end up being 375 pages that are compelling?
Right. Right.
That was that took a few trips around the barn.
And it's hard to like, you know, think too much academically about what you're writing, because I find that it can almost get confusing and distracting if you're thinking like, okay, is this really a 3 act structure? Is this really a hero's journey? Have my characters all changed adequately towards the end? You know, I find for me, I can't do that. I'm like, here's my protagonist, and then what happens?
Yep, yep,
And then it just becomes a whole string of this is what happens next. And then you step back, and when you go to edit, you're like, okay, is this fulfilling,
yep.
to me? Is it satisfying? Whether they change or not, is it a story that is compelling? But sometimes that's very hard for you to judge of your own work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I didn't get introduced to Campbell until my, fifth semester, right? It
Mhm.
was like as I was finishing my book, and I was like, this is, and they do the whole Star Wars thing, right? And how
Right.
this connects to every story you've ever read, and it makes some sense. And then I kind of did the X-ray on my own book and said, how did how did I do? Because I was on my like third rewrite by then, and querying agents, and I was like, oh shit, what? It would have been nice if I got this first semester, right? But the beautiful thing about it was that it didn't follow every beat of the hero's journey, but the major components of it were there,
Yeah.
and I think it's, when you read a couple thousand books by the time you're 47, you're, and there's something there. Campbell would say that it's embedded in all of us, and Young would say that it's in, you know a few more things about that, and I think that's just, there's some innate, a story when you feel it, right?
Right.
And
I think it is embedded.
what's
Yeah.
just a bunch of words that isn't a story when you're saying it, even when you're out at the bar with your friends, and
Right.
they
Right.
all kind of
You
look at
you
you at the
know
end.
when you're writing a chapter and in your mind you're like, ah, who gives a shit? You know you're just like filling in pages that are going to have to be cut. But but yeah, I think I mean I think Campbell's right. I think it is embedded in all of us, and I think that that becomes reinforced through reading, through watching shows, and then you step back and you look at your own story and say, is this compelling to me? If this were a Netflix series, would I watch this? And
Right.
whether or not it follows some structure or not, is it something that I want to know what happens next?
Exactly. Exactly.
And and that's why I think it's a benefit to write for yourself if you have that kind of discipline to be able to make those judgment calls. And also, like if you're not writing for yourself, I don't understand where
Why you're doing it?
where the joy comes from. Like
There's
I
a
get such a kick out of like what happens tonight. I have no idea. Let's find out.
Yeah. If you want to be rich and famous, go start a YouTube channel, right? It's it's a lot
Right.
easier. There's a lot straighter path to the monetization, right?
Yeah.
It's you got to love books, and you got to love the storytelling, and you got to love the joy that comes from reading a sentence you wrote and forgotten that you've written it, and reading it and say, what a great sentence, who wrote that? And,
Right.
and
Right.
there's no
Totally.
there's no better kick as a writer than that. And
Right.
if that sounds silly to you, then
Then
you don't
don't
want to
do
be a
it.
writer.
Right. Right. I, you know, I always I try to appreciate the fact that when I'm writing, even if it's just for that 1 hour every day, it's probably the only time of my day that I am so fully present in the
Yeah.
moment.
Yep.
And it's very meditative, right?
Hmm.
And it becomes very exhausting because of that, because you are so
Mhm.
enveloped in it, and you have to be. And same thing with editing. You can't, with your professional life, how many times you're like, this is good enough, you
Yeah.
know,
Yep. Yep.
and you can't do that with writing. It has to be
Right.
as good as you can possibly make it, which is really tiring. But it's also very fulfilling because you come out of it feeling like you just spent an hour meditating.
Yeah. When I'm writing a book, and my friend said, well, like, what does your day look like? I'm like, I can do, 3 to 5 hours. And
But that's a lot.
and
I
it's
can't do that.
a ton. Like, and for a while I was a little bit embarrassed by that, but then you think back to your work, and how much of a typical work day, if you're working an 8 or 9 hour day, are you
Working.
100% on, immersed,
Right.
and focused on producing something, creating something, and it's,
Right.
an hour and a half a day, and
Yeah,
they're
especially if
they're
you're in a
really putting.
managerial role where you're kind of just,
Yep.
running interference
Yep.
and making sure emails get answered, but you're not actually producing the work, whatever that work may be. Yeah,
Yep.
totally.
Yep.
Totally. And I think that's why it's so tiring. But I think that my theory is the people who write a lot, like more than 5 hours a day, um, probably outline and probably are able to then just to
Yeah,
sit there
that
and
does
but
make them
I don't
tired.
I don't have them,
They're
after 20
typing.
years.
They're
Yeah.
typing more than.
Yeah, and I don't have, after 20 years I don't have that kind of muscle.
Yeah, I wonder about like Joyce Carol Oates, what her life is like, right? You know,
Yeah,
like she puts out a book every, a masterpiece book every 8 months or so. And
that's,
she's got
I
her
mean,
70th or 80th book, and one thing that and I'm 5 years into this and got two books, right? But the one of the one I went to I was kind of interviewing schools as I was trying to decide where I was going to go, right? And I went to the School of Art Institute, and one of the I was talking to one of the professors, and I was saying, I'm really looking forward to immersing myself in this and really devoting significant amounts of time to this. And she was a real quiet person, and she just kind of looked at me and she said, "Don't forget to walk." And
mhm.
that's all she said, right? And there's so much packed into that that for me anyway, the way what I took out of that is that you're going to be a really shitty writer if you're not living your life alongside that, right? And
Right.
if you're locked up in your room, all the time, there's the grist is the mill's going to is going to grind up all the grist, and you're going to be done after that first book, right?
Right.
And
And you're missing out on all the life experiences that feed your ability to write.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I thought about that for I said, huh, and we didn't say anything more about it, but I still remember that conversation and try to apply that it's not all about the production, right? The production will come with the living life the right way, right?
Yeah, and I think if you're not enjoying it because maybe you're doing it that way or a way that's not organic to who you are,
Yeah,
you will
yeah,
quit
yeah,
because it is terrifically hard to write a book, and that's the only thing you really have control over,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Then to get an agent to sell a book,
That's
and
right.
then all of that, you're in the 1%
Yep,
if you've
yep.
traditionally published a book, and then oh, this is how much it pays.
Right. And that 1% is chosen, by 80% luck and 20% confidence, right? And,
Right, right.
and so,
Eh, if not more luck. Yeah,
right. And,
it's you just there because there's no formula. And so why would you it's not a terrible career. It's a rewarding and wonderful career, but
it is.
it's a struggle.
Yeah.
And
I,
you
I,
most people have to work another job. I always preach don't quit your day job,
yeah, yeah,
unless you can afford to,
yeah,
because
exactly.
you're not going to be supporting the family just on what you're making as a writer unless you're really, really, really lucky.
And I was raised Catholic, but I'm, kind of a lazy ass Buddhist is how I would describe myself. And, meaning I've read some books and listened to some audiobooks and, you
Right,
know,
right, right.
meditated consistently for like a week of my
Yeah,
life.
it's a much more casual way of approaching religion than Catholicism, that's
but
for sure.
a thing that I take from that is disconnecting the outcome from the experience, right? And
Yes.
and disconnecting yourself from the desire to be published is what it really means. You can't. I'm not the type of person that can set aside the idea of being published, and when I found out I was going to be published, it was one of the one of the 5 best days of my life, right?
Yeah.
And in case my wife or my children are listening, I have to say
It's really the best day, but
that. Top five. Um,
anyone can have a kid.
the but the but disconnecting it was important for me going through that process to disconnect myself from the outcome, right? And say, I'm enjoying this. I'm never going to get to do this again, probably. I'm taking this 3 years out of my life. I've got two kids that I got to support. One of my kids has special needs, so the nest will be full even after we're gone, right?
Hmm,
And
hmm.
so
Yeah.
I'm taking this 3 years out of my life to do this, and if I succeed, then I get to keep on doing it. If I fail, I got that 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way I was approaching it, and I earned more,
Yeah.
but I would have been happy with those 3 years too,
Yeah. Well, I
and
think that's a
that
great
could
way of
be
approaching it.
that could be the 3 years of weekends. That could be the 10 years of nights, or whatever it is. But if you're not
Right.
enjoying, go do something else.
Right. I think and I teach this as well. I think it's important to have a goal as a
Mhm.
writer,
Yeah,
but that's different than why. your writing. So I always tell people like, okay, what is your writing goal? And your goal might be to be published.
Yeah.
Now, why are you wrote? What is your why as a writer? And for
Right.
me, I quickly realized when I started writing kind of out of the blue when I was 33 and I wrote my first book, I'm like, I guess I'll just be doing this for the rest of my life because I just can't picture not doing it.
Right.
And that
Right.
was my why as a writer. It just because it's just me. And I never knew that. And then of course you want to be published and have all those things, but I would still be writing. You know, I've had a lot of stuff that never got published and I kept
Yeah.
writing because I'm
Publishing
like, it's
doesn't make you happy. I think there's the why of it, right, which is gets a little deeper than is related to the joy of it, right, but not necessarily congruent. And it's like the, publishing will not solve your problems. But publishing that novel will not make you happy for a short period of time. It will,
yeah,
and if the process doesn't do it for you, then again, go do something else because there's
right.
many other ways to prove yourself or to immerse yourself or to gain success or however you define that.
Right. And that's, it's aspiring writers when they ask about like, oh, how do you deal with all the rejection when you're starting out? And it's like, well, if yeah, it's hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rejection, negative reviews, all that stuff is tough and it never gets easier.
Yeah.
But if that's what brings you down, then you're not finding the right why for,
Yeah.
it's
Luckily,
not.
I spent a lot of time selling before I got serious about writing. My life was
Right.
a serious, I was in consulting and doing a lot of selling and so that lifestyle is a series of no's, right?
Yeah. Right.
And with the occasional yes, and every no is a path to a yes. And when I was in grad school, I would write, I would do and then I would do my schoolwork, and
Mm-hmm.
then at night I would submit seven short stories to seven magazines every night,
Wow.
and so and probably not every night, but I counted them up once, and it was like I had like 450 submissions, and it's
Wow.
tough to find 450 open submissions
Right.
over a course of 3 years or 2 years, but that's what you got to do, and every response was somebody read my at least a portion of my work and had an opinion about it and shared it with me,
Yeah.
and let's move on.
Yeah. I will say though, it is tough because writing is so whatever your story is, if you're a fiction writer, you are in that story. It is so deeply personal to you, no matter how divergent your characters are from who you are. And so, there is a bit of like they're rejecting me personally. Um,
Absolutely. But
and and it's but you get used to it.
yeah, I listened to some of your podcasts
Oh, thank you.
before I came on, and wonderful stuff. And I forget you were talking to the other podcaster. I forget her name.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and you guys were talking about reading reviews,
Oh, right, right.
and and I have and part of this was I published my first book during COVID, right? And there's nothing else to do, but I have read there is 712 written reviews on my first book, and I've read
On
every single
Amazon
no
or
on Goodreads,
Goodreads. Yeah,
and
yeah,
and I've read every single one of them, and the good, the bad, the
yeah,
indifferent, the ones that didn't think a guy should be allowed to write the book I wrote, and all that stuff, right?
yeah,
And I learned a lot from it. I and but I think one of the things the mentality I went into it with is that, hey, another person spent 8 hours with something that I produced, or 10 hours with something that I produced, and then took the time to share what they thought about it, and that's
hmm,
freaking awesome.
totally, totally.
and and the fact that that 710 people wrote, or 712 people wrote things down about what I wrote, that is just something that I revel in, right? And
Right.
even though half of them say negative things, right?
But that's the thing too, is like it's very easy to get into the mindset of a writer of that, it's the agent and the editor who those two people are the ones who are making me better writers, because they're professionals who are giving me all their feedback, and we tend to discount the fact that the end user is responsible for a potential major learning experience for you.
Absolutely.
So if you read those 700 reviews and they all say the same thing, that's information
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
apply,
Yep. Yep.
and you don't have to be outward about it, but it'll sit there in your mind like, okay, nobody really likes an ambiguous ending the way that I did it, for example.
Right.
you
Right.
know
Right. Right.
so I when I see something
Or
like
how
that on
many
me, I'm
people
like,
like an ambiguous ending, right?
yeah,
Is it more than two-thirds? I'm going to do that again.
right,
And
right. And you might, totally remember this from my critique group once, years and years and years ago. I had what I thought was a brilliant ending to a book that was never published. And the guy who was leading the group, who was a very sage man who had a lot of experience writing, he's like, I just don't quite think you pulled it off.
Mhm.
And I realized, like, it was a great ending. I just wasn't good enough to write it.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, that I totally respect that. How can
Yeah.
I get better? And it just
Yeah.
takes
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But that's great information to have.
One thing that when I was in school and or when I entered school, I should say, to write, I assumed that the only feedback I was going to get was from my cohort and from my professors, and then I had a book, and some of those people read it, but most of them didn't. Right? They read what they had to in workshop and got a lot of feedback that way. Right? And
Right.
three of them probably read the whole thing,
Mhm.
and the some and gave me feedback, and it's because they're writers, it was always a little bit too prescriptive, right?
Right.
And and then I had friends and family read it that are not writers at all.
Hmm.
Some of them aren't even really readers, but
Right.
they said, here's where I got confused, here's where I didn't
Hmm.
connect, here's where I got bored,
Hmm.
here's what I didn't understand, here's
Right.
what I didn't believe,
Right.
and I
Here's where
left
I
it to
guess
me
the
to
ending.
solve that, right? They
Yeah.
didn't tell me. They just pointed out the mushy spots, right?
Yeah.
And it was my job to go fix them. And if I heard it once, I wasn't sure it was something I needed to fix if I felt strongly about it. And even if I felt strongly about it, when I heard it three times, I'm like, oh, I got to
Yeah.
fix that. That's a problem.
Totally. I think that's the best guidance is, and we've all experienced this. You're in a critique group and there's the one person who's like, I would do this. And the best critique for me is what my editor does is, this is how this made me feel. This is
Right.
this is what I felt I was missing. I'm not going to tell you how to fix it.
Yeah.
I don't know
Right.
how to fix it. You figured
Yeah.
that out. And like, that's great. That's
Yes.
what I need. But it is hard because I do coaching and stuff. And that's my job, is to tell them what I think is wrong. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to tell you how to fix it, but sometimes there's like glaringly like obvious open court shots that you can take right here that you're not taking, and I want to point it out to you. Um, but I think it's important to tell people, like, yeah, this is where I'm confused, or this is
Yeah. Yeah.
this made me feel like bummed out reading this section here. That could be good or bad.
Right. Right. Right.
So, well, Jeff, we're going to wrap up. But before we do, we're going to do the storytelling part of our show. Um,
Let's make
yeah,
something up.
let's make something up. I've picked three books kind of at random. These are all from my signed collection. So I'm going to have you pick one of these, and we're going to pick a random sentence from a random page.
Excellent.
And if you've seen the show before, you know where it goes from here.
Yeah.
Um, I've got Joe Clifford's "Give Up the Dead," Harlan Coben's "6 Years," and Mark Stevens' wonderful baseball novel, "The Fireballer." So choose one of those.
I want the fireballer.
It's really good. He's a buddy of mine who lives in Southern Colorado. And it's a terrific book. So give me a page between 1 and 375.
Let's go with 92.
All right. So I'm just going to quickly scan here. It's the last page of a chapter. Um, all right. I'm just going to read this and you do what you want with it.
Oh,
Why is everyone looking at me? Says Ryder.
I've only been here 10 minutes. I've been here 10 goddamn minutes. And everybody in the whole bar is looking at me.
Of course, I knew why everyone was looking at him. It's the same reason I was looking at him, because he's a complete fuck up and he wasn't even dressed properly for this event. But I'm too close of a friend to tell him that. So I just ordered a drink and told him to shut up.
But unfortunately, after I ordered the drink, I realized that he was an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic. And this was the worst possible place for him. And it wasn't his dress that was the problem. It was that hungry look in his eyes, that bead of sweat that started to roll down the side of his face because of the gin and tonic that was in my hand. So,
but I also knew Ryder could serve a purpose. In fact, I think I've known that the whole time. It was probably the reason I even asked him to this bar to begin with. I needed him to do something for me, and I needed him to hit rock bottom in order to do it. I handed him his drink and toasted and said, to tonight.
And that's where we ended.
Perfect. Something terrible was going to happen. I love it. I love the idea of somebody like knowing you're an alcoholic and it's just like, yeah, that's a vehicle for me to do something.
Bad shit has to happen in novels.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's not interesting.
That's right. That's right.
So it's funny. Like when I started writing and I got my agent and I didn't even know what I was writing. It was just a story I liked. And she's like, oh, it's a thriller. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then you get that question over time, like, why do you write thrillers? And I'm like, I don't know. I like writing about conflict. It's interesting to me. Yeah. And I think you need to have conflict in any type of writing. Thrillers might be a little bit more heavy conflict, but it's, but you don't set out saying, I'm going to be a domestic suspense writer.
Right. The story comes.
Well, listen, Jeff, congratulations on your upcoming release. That March 5th, is that right?
March 5th. Yeah. Next week.
That's very exciting.
It is.
Do you have events planned and things like that?
We do. I have a number of events, but the main ones are one in Chicago and one in St. Louis. And
wonderful.
I have the bookstores lined up, and more importantly, the room at the bar afterwards for
right. Yeah, you'll need it. Well, good luck.
And Ryder doesn't come though.
Yep.
I know what he's struggling with.
He could be the source for your next book, though.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed this. And
yeah, it was great hanging out with you, and hopefully I'll get to meet you in person at a conference someday.
That sounds great. Thanks, guys.
All right, brother. See ya.
Bye.
So that's it, friends. That is my conversation with author Jeff Hoffmann, whose new book that was just released, Like It Never Happened, just came out on March 5th of this year. I highly encourage you to check out his book. And if you want to know more about Jeff, please head over to his website, which is jeffhoffmannwrites.com. And while you're at it, please head over to my website, carterwilson.com. You can learn about my offerings from my Unbound Writer Company. You can check out my books, my appearances, and sign up for my newsletter. I spend a lot of damn time on that newsletter. So sign up for it, see if you like it, spread the word. It all helps. Everything helps. That's it for now, folks. Thanks so much for watching and or listening to this. As always, more episodes coming out next week. In the meantime, take care.